what is that? Everybody has no idea what it was. I never knew what it was.
They used to have an artist in residence program, and an artist would come here and live for the summer and paint or make sculpture or teach or whatever for their dinner. And so one of the artists was a woman who did these beautiful fantasy murals on the dome. You know, she took different fairy tales and depicted them on each of the faces.
What is this?
The children's program.
Yeah, this is folk dancing. This, I would guess, is probably around 1970.
Pretty soon.
I'm dying to tell the story.
Elliot knows, you know what Elliot
It's
did.
for dancing out in the middle. The kids don't.
I think that's Harry, isn't it?
You don't let a folk.
Yeah, it looks like
Planning
it.
pool in the bar.
This, you can't mistake that stats anywhere.
Yeah.
In the structure?
Was this cute?
Yeah.
Is this cute?
I never heard of it called on myself. I never heard
All
of
those kids now says 45 years, these people are all 50s now.
Where are you, Paul?
I think I'm getting into trouble somewhere. Far away. Six years. I mean, if he was 10, yeah, I was definitely getting into trouble. That's it, yeah?
Tiffany?
So, on the folk dancing, just to say that the first year we came here was 77, and they used to have folk dancing for the adults in the evening. I don't remember it very well because it was all seen through a haze of marijuana smoke. What I remember it's like falling down to the ground, and then I think Vern Piven was here.
Yeah.
I remember Vern Piven had an incredible flair and energy, he was throwing us around and.
Does anybody know Vern Piven?
Oh, yeah, he's an actor.
Bird Pivot, his name was on the, we used to have a thing where they would call people because nobody had telephones.
Yeah.
And no one ever called us.
Yeah,
So
no.
we felt terrible, but Piven's name was always being called.
Right, you know, that's who got really called the most was
That's
I know,
Weinberg.
Any questions?
banker.
Was your grandfather involved with the 1933 World's Fair?
No, he was just involved in demolishing it. His company specialized in demolitions. He did like, things like taking down tall buildings and cleaning up steel mills, heavy industrial stuff.
How did it happen that he owned this property?
He bought the property as a summer place for the family
When?
in 1937, or late 36, early 37.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they had come to South Haven a few times and stayed at the resorts here in the early 30s, and that's when he decided to buy the property.
What led to the decision to change this from a family place to a resort?
I think that was part of the plan all along. He was a restless guy, and he had this construction company, and I think he had a lot of people that weren't that busy in the 30s. And he liked the resort idea, and South Haven had been a major resort center since the 1880s. So I bet he had that in mind all along.
Well, my mother used to come in the, this would have been in the early 30s, and she said there were resorts all over, but when she retold the story, she said the resorts were really just boarding houses.
That's pretty true, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they were mostly farms, where people had like bed and breakfast.
But even around the city, yeah, whether it was Fiddleman's.
I guess they each had their own characteristics, because I've heard from old timers that Sleepy Hollow had a very different era than the rest of the resorts did. It was more artistic, it was more...
Well, that mostly dates from the 60s when my dad took it over. He's the one who turned the barn into a theater, who brought members of the symphony and the opera up here in the summer, who had an artist in residence program. He kind of refocused it into an artsy, because that's, he was after the audience of people that he knew in Hyde Park around the university and stuff like that to come here. Because the resort was, a money loser almost every year, my grandfather. But when he died in 1961, my grandmother said she was never going to come back here again. It was his thing, and I think it was kind of she felt it was more like a rope around her neck to be up here with 7 kids and household to run and everything else.
Was it a passion for your father?
Well, they couldn't sell it. I mean, I think they got an offer of $200,000 for the 40 acres, all the cottages, 500 beds, everything that was here. And it just seemed like there had to be more value here than that. And my dad was kind of in between businesses, and he thought, well, I'll buy it and take it over. And that's what he did. He bought it on time, paid my grandmother over 10 years or something like that. And he had a different vision for it. But he started in the art business just a few years after that, and so he did the two together, this in the summer, that in the winter. And by 1970, I guess, when he started talking to Dick Orlikoff about setting it up as a condo, what he wanted to do was get some capital out of it that he could use to build the art business, and not to be responsible for it anymore.
We heard it was,
Good move.
What was?
we heard it was said that was the first time in Michigan that a resort had been turned into a condo association.
I heard the same thing.
Is that true? There are two other bits I'd like to get cleared up. One is that those piers going out from your place, older folks in town used to tell us that, well, we know what was going on there. That was for the syndicate from Chicago to come up and that used that house. There are more syndicate stories in South Haven around this part of the lake. Any truth to that?
I've never seen any evidence of that. Lots of circumstantial things, but
There's 2 generations of playing in the basement of that house, and we've
Yeah.
never found anything. Believe me, I've looked.
yeah, especially
Thanks for all
after the.
Well, there's also, Stan, there's a story that there's a tunnel from your house out to the bluff where you can make a quick escape.
2 generations of kids playing in that basement.
There was a guard here about 10 or 15 years ago who said he found the exit to the tunnel on the bluff. And I spent several summers kind of prowling around it.
It's more likely to be a sewer pipe.
Close enough.
Because before Sleepy Hollow was connected to the city sewers, there was a big drainage field right down there on the bluff.
We know.
Beach field.
Leach field, yeah.
Had the lake frozen over in '36? That was the last myth I heard, and that some of the building materials that had been stripped out of the World Fair came over across on the ice.
Really? I've never
That,
heard that.
again, I think there are lots of mythical stories going on.
I don't know. I do know that my grandfather was a pack rat. I mean, he used to attend, or have people attend auctions of bankrupt properties and things like that, and he just had stuff everywhere. The property where the tennis courts are across the road, just a little closer to North Shore Drive from that wooded area, used to be filled with stuff that they dumped after the demolition of the World's Fair. There were, vending machines and steel joists and, plumbing fixtures, and it's probably still all out there. And the barn, I know when my dad converted the barn, it was full of stuff. There was an old Model T in there, and just stacked up to the ceiling.
And you put that outside the barn where the bell was, and
Yeah.
before concerts, they'd ring the bell,
Right.
playing the Model T.
I mean, old garden sculptures, all those barber poles, there were hundreds of those things.
Music used to play from the tower over here. Is that
No,
correct?
I don't remember that. I guess it did. Yeah, I know it did, because there was a special record player system in the house that was wired to that tower, and there was thousands of records in the house. But that must have gone on before I was, you know, in the 40s and 50s, I guess they did that.
What's the total acreage that your grandfather bought, do you know?
I always heard it was 40. But I don't know, actually. I think we have 12 now. So if Sleepy Hollow is 28, then it would be 40. On to the next historian.
Thank you. Paul, thank you so much for sharing your family movies with
Thanks,
us.
Jody.
It's just wonderful. And Ian, thank you also for coming up. It was
Oh, yeah.
a nice surprise to get another generation here. So now we're going to have Stan and Chris Davis come and give us their take on Sleepy Hollow history.
Good job. Good job.
Chris Davis, Stan Davis from Oak Park, Illinois, owners of Unit 50. I want to get prepared for the third grade retired teacher's PowerPoint presentation. Can you see? This is to make us go fast because we have 15 minutes. Okay. What brought us here was Tulip Festival. In 1970, I thought it was 74, but I guess it was 73. Anyway, my mother and stepfather, my stepfather was a member of the MORA, Men of Retirement Age Club.
That's not Pennsylvania.
And they came and they stayed here and they found this place, so they were the first generation to stay here. We heard they were coming, so we came up here and we stayed in Paul Gray's unit, Unit A. It was the worst time forever. There were no flowers, it rained, it was awful, it did everything but snow. We finally called it STEM Festival instead of Tulip Festival. So while we were in Paul Gray's unit and the rain was pouring all around, we said, we started reading this stuff. I said, this looks pretty neat. Studs wrote some of his work here. Working, I think it was. I said, yeah, this must be a neat place. We've got to come back here. So, the next day, of course, the sun came out, the bus took off, and we said goodbye to my mom and Harold. So we started to walk over to the lake, and we ran into Ted Willems, who is now the owner of Unit F, and he eventually, down the road, became the first president of the association.
We think. No.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So he said, Richard Gray is inside, why don't you go talk to him? He's selling off these units. Now this was Sleepy Hollow real estate back in our day that we remember. Unit 7 at that time was going for $21,000. Well, we had just bought our house in Oak Park for $23,000, so we decided, no, that might be a little high. Unit 19, I really liked that. It was $16,500. I thought, that's a little high. 52, the gateway was totally open. Morgan's unit, now Seidel's unit, $8,500. Like that, but that was on the second floor. And so we decided on $10,500. That sounded pretty good for Unit 50. So we went in, and Richard Gray said, well, think about it. So I said, we really would like to do this. And then he said, well, we've got this all figured out, $10,500. Well, we can't sign the contract. What about assessments? And I said, what are assessments? I didn't know what they were. So finally, on a handshake, he said, I'll tell you what. You come up here with your family this summer, on us, spend a couple of weeks, and on a handshake. And we decided to do this, and we would come back and sign the papers in October. So, second generation, third generation, and the kids came up here, and we were over, and that's when we discovered the Gateway had counselors. So they were in the unit behind us, part of the Gateway building, and I thought, we became kind of like parents, house parents or something. So the counselors came up for the summer. In fact, there was one girl we met who we knew her grandmother back in Pennsylvania. And they came up here and there were either maids, babysitters, waitresses, worked in the children's program, they were lifeguards, you name it. That's what they did, and they got their salary at the end of the time, so that they could take that money and go back to college. Well, we found out that the kids were kind of hungry, so we went over, so we were either feeding them, so we went over to the manager at the time and just said, you gotta give them a snack before they go to bed because they're hungry. So I said, that was the beginning of our time. Once we bought the place, that was our beginning of our time, that we thought, we really have a concern for the welfare of the people who work for us. Okay, as Paul mentioned, when we first came up here, the man I talked to was a man who had worked in Oak Park, and he's the one who got us our unit. And then we came up here and we found out he had had a heart attack, so it was Richard, Paul, and Jenny running the show, and Harry who made the best milkshakes. Okay, Sam.
Okay, so the first, we're gonna take you quickly through the managers that we have known. First of all, you have to understand how complex this place is. You do not have any idea till you sit on the board how complex this place is to run. So a manager has to deal with not only the physical complexity, but the human complexity that is represented by all of us sitting here. But Mr. Gannon, our favorite image of him, he was from Ireland. And he came from a boutique hotel in New York, I believe your dad told us. And he would talk about the gliders sitting around as rollers. One of the, we still call them in our family rollers. He was very concerned that these trees needed trimming. Now this is back in the 70s. These trees really are in bad shape. And then he helped implement the stuff from your family with music and shows in the barn.
Stand by gliders, you mean those chairs?
Yeah,
We go back and forth?
Like the
rollers.
Still have
Then
some.
came a man named Pete Serra. Again, having to deal with all the complexity. He was married and he had a dog. And what needed to happen was, according to him, he needed to have a place built for his dog. So he moved, instead of, in the old building here, what would be called the community building, there were a couple of apartments up there that were called association units. And that's where Mr. Gannon lived. Well, Mr. Serra and his wife and his dog didn't want to live there, so they moved over to 37, to the farmhouse. And the things that we remember about Mr. Gannon is that, apart from the dog, is that he had to take his wife to mass every morning, and he liked to play golf. Bob Schneider. Bob Schneider did a lot of things. He hired Jackie and Scott. He changed Gray's Inn to Ichabod's. He started the Sunday brunches, the barbecues, music on the deck. The counselor's unit became a rental unit behind us, which was kind of okay sometimes, and sometimes not. He started Oktoberfest, and we would have polkas, and we remember Bob and Judy Higgins, who is the Judy that is the server at Phoenix now, dancing around here during Polka Fest, or during Oktoberfest. And yes, Bob introduced the chicken dance, I think, to Southwest Michigan. And he also had a headless horseman come riding by. So, John McBride, he took us through the rebuilding of Sleepy Hollow, apart from everything else, which was nothing short of a miracle that it all happened, and we're still here. And Scott is making his own contributions as he is now currently our manager. I was on the board for 12 years, 4 years as president. I called myself the sewer president, or Joel called me that, I'm not sure which, but Joel and I
That's a
were on the board
compliment.
together. One of the joys of serving on the board was listening to Joel and Emil Markin try to outdo each other and cutting each other up. It was sort of a draw. Had to deal with the issue of the leach field that Paul briefly mentioned. All of our sewage ran over onto Gray's dune, or part of the dune, and we knew it was not going to last forever. So I was in deep negotiations with Don Maxwell, who was the Casco Township Supervisor. If I can take you back to Tip
Still
O'Neill,
is.
who said all politics is local, you better believe it's true up here. Don Maxwell's favorite phrase was, when we said, can't you hook up to the half-used sewage system in South Haven? I'm not going to let those city slickers in South Haven tell us what to do here in Casco Township.
Oh, my God.
While I was on the board, was there ever a more contentious issue at the time than the restaurant? There was part of us that felt it was an amenity. It was a way of letting demystifying this place a bit for the locals, but it became impossible to maintain financially. I also was part of we own about 8 or 9 lots northeast of what we used to call the new tennis courts, the ones on 74th Street. Those were purchased when I was president, and you're still trying to decide what, if anything, we can do, because they're all landlocked. But nonetheless, our hope was that we could get to the place where we might be able to expand something.
It's not enough in Sleepy Hollow to have one person on the board, so if you're a nephew, you've got to get on the board too. Both of you have to get on the board. So my turn came during 2000 to 2006, and I was secretary for the 6 years we were doing the rebuilding. And at the end, I went through, since I got an archivist for a daughter, my daughter and I went through all of the minutes, organized them, put them in binders, and I think they're safely someplace. We're doing fine. Memories, we can talk about a lot of memories. We can talk about the closing of 50, going ahead with Frank Bill.
One of the reasons we like Sleepy Hollow, it was away from everything. But it was also the first place opened in the spring, because you remember these were not year-round. It was the last place closed in the fall. Came to the fall, and we started this kind of strange little negotiation process with Frank Bill that you mentioned. Frank Bill was sort of in charge of maintenance here.
He wasn't just in charge of it, he did it.
Did it?
Well, and
Frank
Frank took most of where the pipes were with him to the grave, I think. There was no site map, I remember. Anyway, so we would start with Frank. Now, Frank, we close after Columbus Day. How long do you think we have? Well, maybe another week, maybe 2. Then, well, we get to the kind of almost the end of October. Frank, how long do you think we can come up next weekend? Well, let's see, I think and then suddenly, mysteriously, I would produce a small bottle of vodka. And we could stay as long as we wanted.
I can still hear the sound of the old screen door in our old unit. We've got lots of memories of kids walking on the beach, family reunions, all kinds of things. But probably the two memories we want to share with you was Rabbi Yumpel and his wife organized, this is the fun one, it was Rabbi Yumpel and his wife organized an October program for the owners. And my favorite part is they gave us a whole section. We've got these, can you believe, from 1970s. And it was a scavenger hunt. And we had to figure it out first. Bathing suit. Okay, that's easy. It was a bathing suit. This is the one I love. 10S racket. So we had to figure, I mean, you can look through all these when we're finished. But we had to sit there and figure them all out. And the deal was, you could not be with your spouse. So I was in the scavenger hunt with Pearl, the original owner of 14A, Mr. Pearl, Unit 50 Chris, Diane Lossman, 8B, and Harry Graham. Well, I was in the back seat with Diane, figuring this all out, trying to figure all these things out. We pull up, Harry says, I'm gonna go. We were going down 74th Street. No, not 74th. North Shore Drive, I was gonna say Lake Shore. Anyway, Harry gets up, I'll go in and I'll see if I can get some of this. So we're sitting figuring all of a sudden he goes, wah! and I see Harry is running down the sidewalk with this man chasing him, screaming at him, chasing at him. And Harry jumps in the car, locks the door. So Mr. Pearl is very calmly telling this man that we're from Sleepy Hollow, we're doing a scavenger hunt. And this guy was really annoyed because he said, he not only knocked on the door, he saw them, and then he started knocking on the windows. So anyway, that's my fun story. He was bound and determined to get this article. So on at the same time, with our other sad story memory, probably the most vivid memory.
My most vivid memory is Rabbi Yappel was an Orthodox rabbi, and he had his nephew visiting who had just come from a summer in Israel. And I remember that afternoon he was playing with our kids in the pool and everything. He went out on a date that night, and there used to be, most of you remember, a blinker that was there. It was a very, at North Shore Drive at 74th and Blue Star. It was a very dangerous place, and unfortunately, the young man and his date were in a terrible automobile accident, and the young man was instantly killed.
Oh, well, the girl was
Now-
the owner's daughter, right? The sorter daughter.
Yes.
The owner's of
Oh, that's right, there were two of them, both
Yeah.
of them died. That's
No,
right.
no,
No, she was
just the-
alive.
Just the
That's
apple
right,
boy.
she survived, boy,
Right.
the memories do fade. I remember being,
Yes.
Jewish law was that you had to stay with the body, and so he was trying, Rabbi Yampel was trying to negotiate with the state police. The state police were not really up to date on Jewish funeral practices and requirements. And so I was there between negotiating with the police on one hand and staying by the body on the other, and there's too many details anyway. The body was able to be removed, and burial took place the next day back in Chicago. But it was a terrible, terrible scene, and I never go by that intersection without thinking of that, and I'm so glad the roundabout is there, because that blinker was hugely dangerous.
Special things about South Haven, Sleepy Hollow. I always felt it was a safe haven, safe. In the morning, you didn't have to worry about your kids. In the morning, had the children's program for 2 hours. In the afternoon, and in the afternoon. Then in the evening, any renter kids that were here and any owner kids would travel around in a pack. And Harry Gray was the Pied Piper. And these kids would just follow Harry all around. And we're talking about kids of all ages. And I can still remember my kids had to be home by midnight at a certain time. And I can still remember your brother going on his bicycle, Christopher, Christopher, and he was looking for Christopher. But you knew the kids were safe, and this was like about 10 o'clock at night. And it was just a safe place.
I knew I should have introduced myself as Harry.
Yeah, but you're the one that... So we come here to rest, relax, and enjoy. And I'd like to end by reading something that I wrote when I was teaching writing to the teachers in Oak Park. A special gift. My husband and I had a real hankering for an escape weekend to our hideaway in Michigan. There are no phones and no noises, except the sound of a chattering cricket or a few scampering squirrels. The city noise of the street sweeper was exchanged for the gentle sound of the waves lapping gingerly across the sandy beach. A myriad of stars stretched across the dark sky, lighting the way for us as we traveled north to our place of rest. Finally, we reached our destination. Our white building beckoned us to come and rest a while. Rest, relax, refresh yourself. The next evening, we walked down to the beach. The sun touched down on the horizon, kissed the water goodnight. The sky was ablaze with the fiery aftermath of the glowing setting sun. Gradually, the stars began their arrival. The driftwood had been gathered for the bonfire. The logs were in place, ready to be ignited. The fire was hot. Mosquitoes hummed hungrily in a circle over my head. I crept closer to the fire in hopes of abandoning them. We roasted marshmallows, which stood on the point of our roughly hewn sticks. The fire blazed and snapped at us. Its tongues lashed out and spit tiny sparks against the wet sand. My marshmallow was roasted too much and it caught on fire and turned a crisp charcoal. I dug my bare feet into the sand, felt the coolness against my toes. The moon shone on Lake Michigan, making a silver path across the water. My tummy was warm, my feet were cool, and I was happy, just sitting there gazing into the fire. I thought about our